When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I smiled. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was disbelief. 10 years I had spent making a home for my family, 10 years of love, care, and small sacrifices, and in one calm, quiet sentence, it all seemed gone. I could hear the words again in my head, clear and sharp, though they had been spoken softly. "Mom, you don't belong here anymore." She didn't raise her voice. There was no anger, no shouting, just a quiet finality in her tone that cut deeper than anything else could. My heart thudded in my chest, and my hands trembled, but my lips just curved into a smile I didn't even feel. I stayed silent. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was shock. I watched her turn away, her back stiff, her eyes not meeting mine. And in that moment, I realized that the home I had poured myself into, the family I had nurtured, was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And yet, as I stood there in the quiet kitchen, I noticed the little things. The sunlight streaming through the window, the faint smell of tea, the hum of the refrigerator. Life went on around me, indifferent to my pain. And I thought, maybe I can survive this too. Maybe I can find a way to keep going, even when it feels like I have no place left in the world I helped build. I remember the first time I walked into this house, years ago, when my son brought home his new fiancée. She was polite, smiling, her hands folded in front of her as she met my eyes. I had been nervous, I admit, imagining all sorts of things. Would she be kind? Would she respect our family? Would my son be happy? I didn't know then that life sometimes has small hints of what's to come, and sometimes, it has no hints at all. My son, always the careful one, introduced us quietly. "Mom, this is Sarah," he said. "Sarah, this is my mom." She nodded, a small smile on her lips, and said hello. Her voice was soft, almost shy, and I smiled back. I thought maybe we could all get along. Over the years, we did have moments. Simple ones, quiet ones. A shared cup of tea in the mornings. A small chat in the kitchen about the weather. I would make her favorite meals, trying to show kindness without being overbearing. And my son always seemed happy. That was enough for me. Happiness is contagious, or so I thought. I loved my son more than anything. I had raised him through sleepless nights, school projects, illnesses, and heartbreaks. I had always thought that love, patience, and care could build bridges over any distance, mend any misunderstanding. And for a while, it felt like that was true. Our family was a small, quiet world where love had its place, even if we didn't always speak it out loud. But life, as I slowly learned, has a way of shifting. Small cracks appear where you least expect them. Quiet tensions that seem harmless at first can grow. And sometimes, the people you trust most are the ones who end up letting you down, not out of malice, but simply because they follow their own path. I had noticed little things before. A curt reply here, a sigh there. But I ignored them, telling myself I was imagining things. I wanted to believe in the best of people. I wanted to believe in my family. And maybe that was my first mistake. Our home was always full of warmth. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, the living room carried the faint scent of lavender from the candles I liked to light in the evenings. My son and I would sometimes sit by the window, watching the world outside, sharing quiet laughter about trivial things. These moments felt sacred to me, small reminders that life was still beautiful. I never imagined that such a life could be questioned, or that my place in it could be challenged. But life has a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the people you love most. The first small argument happened over something I barely remember. It was a trivial thing, perhaps the way I set the table, or a meal I made. I had laughed it off at first, thinking it was a simple misunderstanding. But then I noticed the pattern. Criticism became a quiet undercurrent in our home. Not loud, not dramatic, just present, like a shadow stretching across the floor. One evening, my son and I were sitting at the table. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked. I tried to make conversation, asking about her day, her plans. She answered politely, but with a distance that hadn't been there before. "Mom," she said suddenly, without looking up from her cooking, "I think you should spend more time in your room these days." I paused, unsure if I had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "It's just, you're in the way sometimes. We need our space." Her words were gentle, almost kind, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. My son looked at me, his expression apologetic but silent. I nodded slowly, saying nothing. Later, when I was alone, I felt a quiet ache in my chest, a slow-spreading sorrow that I could not shake. Days passed, and the small tensions grew. I noticed the way Sarah would redirect conversations, exclude me from plans, and subtly criticize my choices. I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that perhaps I was imagining things. But the silence in our home became heavier, like a room slowly filling with water. I started to feel invisible, as if the life I had built and the love I had given were no longer enough. My son remained caught in the middle, hesitant to speak, torn between his mother and his wife. And I stayed silent. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to cause more pain. So I swallowed my hurt and tried to be patient, hoping that one day, things would return to how they were. It all came to a head one quiet afternoon. I was in the living room, folding laundry, when I heard their voices from the kitchen. My son was speaking softly, trying to reason, but Sarah's tone had a cold edge I hadn't heard before. "I can't live like this anymore," she said, and even though she was speaking to him, I felt every word pierce my chest. "Mom is always around, always telling me what to do, always in the way. I just can't handle it." I dropped the laundry for a moment, my hands trembling. My son's face was pale, his jaw tight. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, but I stayed quiet, hidden behind the half-open door. "And I've decided," she continued, "she doesn't belong here anymore. Not in this house. Not in my life. I can't do this with her here." The words landed on me like a cold, heavy stone. She had said them before, yes, but now there was no ambiguity. There was no room for misunderstanding. This was final. This was deliberate. My son looked down, unable to meet my eyes, caught between love and loyalty. I left the room quietly. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. The walls, once comforting, seemed to shrink around me. I felt small, powerless, invisible. For the first time in my life, I realized that love and care, even when given freely, cannot always protect you from heartbreak. That night, I lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the house. The quiet was unbearable. I thought about my son, about the life we had built together, about the years of laughter, tears, and ordinary days that had once felt so safe. And now, it felt as though all of it could disappear in an instant. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. I began to notice things I had never noticed before. Subtle glances, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room, small exclusions that made me feel like I was fading away. One evening, my son approached me. His eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. "Mom, I don't know what to do," he whispered. I love you, but I also love her. I don't want to hurt either of you." I looked at him, my heart aching. "Son," I said softly, "I just want you to be happy. I want you to live your life fully, without tension, without sadness. That's all I ever wanted." He shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "I feel like I'm losing both of you. I don't know how to fix this." I didn't answer. I simply hugged him, feeling the weight of years, the weight of love, and the weight of inevitability pressing down on both of us. That night, I realized that the only way to survive this heartbreak was to let go, at least a little, and trust that life would show me another path. The turning point, I now understood, was not a single event, but a series of moments. Every small criticism, every cold look, every whispered word of exclusion had built up until it became undeniable. My presence was no longer welcome in the home I had nurtured. And yet, in that realization, there was a strange clarity. I began to pack small things quietly. Not out of defeat, but out of understanding. I didn't want to fight, didn't want to argue. I just wanted to leave space for everyone to breathe, to live, to find happiness, even if that happiness no longer included me. One morning, as the sun rose, I sat at the kitchen table with a box of belongings beside me. My son entered, hesitant. He looked at me, searching for answers, for a plan, for some way to undo what had been done. "Mom, are you really going?" he asked softly. I nodded, my throat tight. "I think it's best. I can't stay where I'm not wanted." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply sat across from me, holding my hand, letting the silence speak for both of us. And in that silence, I felt a quiet acceptance, a small relief. Sometimes love is not about holding on. Sometimes love is about letting go. Leaving the house was harder than I had imagined. Each step down the hallway, each turn through the door, carried memories, small, ordinary moments that suddenly felt monumental. I paused at the front step, my hand on the doorknob, and looked back at the home that had been my world. I remembered my son's laughter echoing through these rooms, the smell of freshly baked bread, the quiet nights spent reading together, the simple, comforting rhythms of daily life. And I felt grief. Quiet, steady grief that settled into my chest like a gentle weight. But I also felt something else, a strange sense of relief. I realized that my worth was not tied to a house, or a kitchen, or even to being wanted by someone who had turned away. My worth had always been in my love, my patience, and the life I had lived fully, even when it was ordinary. I moved into a small apartment nearby. It was modest, quiet, and unfamiliar. But slowly, I began to make it my own. I arranged the furniture, added small touches that reminded me of home, and spent long evenings simply being alone with my thoughts. At first, the loneliness was overwhelming. I missed my son terribly, missed the familiar sounds and smells of the house I had left. But over time, I realized that solitude could also be healing. I began to write letters to my son, not to send, but to express the love I still carried for him. Writing became a balm for my heart, a way to process the pain without letting it consume me. One afternoon, my son came to visit. His face was tired, but he smiled when he saw me. We sat together in my small living room, drinking tea and sharing stories. He told me about his life, his challenges, and his small victories. And I listened, quietly, letting the love between us exist without the weight of expectation. "Sarah, she's still unhappy," he confessed softly. And I don't know how to help her. But I do know I want you in my life. Always. I smiled, tears brimming in my eyes. "I'll always be here for you, my son. That will never change." In the months that followed, our relationship found a new rhythm. It was quieter, gentler, and somehow more genuine. I no longer tried to force closeness or demand attention. I simply existed as the mother I had always been, loving without expectation. Through this distance, I began to understand a simple truth. Sometimes, the hardest part of love is knowing when to step back. Holding on too tightly can hurt everyone, including yourself. But letting go, even when it feels like losing, can open the door to understanding, healing, and quiet peace. I also began to notice small joys in my life again. A morning walk in the crisp air, the sound of birds outside my window, the laughter of friends I had neglected. These small moments reminded me that life continues, even after heartbreak, and that beauty can exist in simplicity. And slowly, I forgave, not because the pain had disappeared, but because I realized that forgiveness was not about the other person. It was about freeing myself from bitterness, reclaiming my heart, and allowing space for love, even if it was quieter than before. My son and I remained close. Our bond was different now, yes, but it was real, honest, and resilient. And though Sarah and I never found warmth, we found civility. We learned to coexist without resentment, and in that, there was a strange, quiet victory. I also learned to listen to myself. To honor my own feelings, my own needs, and my own space. For years, I had put everyone else first, sometimes at the cost of my own well-being. Now, I realized that self-respect was not selfish, it was necessary. Life, I understood, is not always about the moments of happiness we imagine. Sometimes it is about enduring the hard moments with grace, finding meaning in pain, and learning that love is not possession, it is freedom. Freedom to give, freedom to receive, and freedom to let go when necessary. And so, I built a new life. Quiet, simple, and filled with love that was steady and true. I knew the house I had left, the life I had known, would always exist in my memory. But it no longer controlled me. I carried it with me, gently, like a song you can hum without the need for lyrics. Years have passed since I left that house, since I stepped away from the life I had built so carefully. And yet, I carry it with me, not as a burden, but as a part of who I am. Every memory, every small joy and quiet sorrow, has shaped me into the person I am today. I have learned that life does not always go the way we hope, and love is not always returned in the way we expect. I still see my son often. We sit together, drink tea, talk about our days, and sometimes, simply share silence. There is no bitterness between us, only a quiet understanding. We don't need to fix what cannot be fixed. We only need to be present for each other, and that is enough. Sometimes, I think about Sarah. I do not carry anger for her, though I will not pretend the hurt wasn't real. People are shaped by their own experiences, their own fears, and their own needs. Her choices were hers to make, and mine were mine. Accepting that has brought me a peace I never imagined possible. I have also discovered new joys, simple ones, that I may have overlooked when I was focused on holding on to what no longer belonged to me. A morning walk in the quiet neighborhood, the smell of fresh bread baking in my oven, the laughter of a friend over tea, these moments remind me that life continues, even after loss. And in those moments, I feel gratitude. Looking back, I realize that the most important lessons were not in the moments of comfort or ease, but in the moments of quiet pain. Pain teaches patience, endurance, and empathy. It teaches us that letting go is sometimes the kindest act, not just for others, but for ourselves. I have learned that silence, too, can be a form of strength. Sometimes, staying silent, not out of weakness, but out of calm reflection, is the way we protect our hearts. And so, I have rebuilt my life. Not in the grand, dramatic ways of stories you hear, but in quiet, gentle steps. I have learned to honor my own needs, to respect my own feelings, and to find joy in simple things. I have learned that love does not always mean staying, sometimes it means stepping back, giving freedom, and allowing others to find their own paths while we find ours. I also understand now that family is not always defined by who shares your home or your daily routine. Family is love that endures through absence, that survives tension, and that remains even when circumstances change. My son and I are family, always. And I am learning to see that the heart has infinite capacity to care, even when it must also protect itself. If I could speak to anyone who has felt invisible, unwanted, or cast aside, I would say this: your worth is never defined by someone else's approval. You are valuable simply because you exist. And sometimes, stepping back, giving yourself space, and choosing peace over conflict is the most courageous act of all. I have found peace in the quiet, in the simple rhythms of life, in the knowledge that I did my best with love and care. And that, I think, is enough. Enough to heal. Enough to hope. Enough to continue. So, I stay silent no longer out of shock or fear, but out of calm strength. I speak when it matters, I love without expectation, and I cherish the moments I have, however small. Life is not perfect. Love is not always returned. But peace can be found, quietly, when we let go, forgive, and honor ourselves. And in that peace, I have finally found home. Not the home I once knew, but a home within myself, a home filled with love, reflection, and quiet hope for whatever comes next.